All right, I am in the car, ladies and gentlemen, with a good friend. So good that a couple years ago, when he was going through some significant medical concerns, I did not visit him at all in the hospital.
That's right.
Even though he was right down the road. I figured that was the last thing you'd need to see.
I was like, more bad news.
But congratulations on the circumcision, and very happy for it, ladies and gentlemen. Chuck Staton of the Funbearable podcast. Well, look, you've done so many things. You've had, you've been in so many different projects. Do you have your own IMDb? Like, do you manage that?
I do have an IMDb.
Yeah.
But yeah, I honestly, you have to pay to manage it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I hate it.
I'm
not paying for this. You make your own things. I don't care if they're fake or real. I don't know. What's my concern?
I know.
No, it's yeah, buddy. I appreciate you having me on today. I really do. It's gonna be. I'm very excited to talk to you. I'm gonna talk to you in a while.
I know you have this project that. For me, it feels relatively new, but you're coming up on the 100th episode of the Funbearable podcast. It's a great show. For those who don't know, what is the genesis of it, and how did this one come together?
Yeah, so I love podcasting. I started podcasting with my buddy Brad in 2009.
Okay.
So this was before microphones existed.
Sure.
So we were just doing it into tin cans. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But it was, like a lot of things, it's like, I'm sure you kind of deal with the same thing. You deal with some stumbling blocks up front.
Sure.
Or maybe the quality is not exactly what you want, episode 1. And what happened was, over the years, I got really into the podcasting industry. So I started doing film work with Tell 'em Steve Dave, which is a big podcast in New Jersey, with one of the Impractical Jokers and the guys from Comic Book Men. I started working for Kevin Smith on his podcast. I started producing Tuesdays with Stories with Mark Norman and Joe List. I started working with Mike Birbiglia on his podcast. I did the pilot for Drew Barrymore's podcast. And all this experience really kind of like made me learn more about the industry and what works and what doesn't work, and kind of really raise my standards.
Yeah.
And so, I had loved the Chuck and Brad podcast. We had so much fun doing it. And while I was getting all this information and all this experience, we started bringing on this third guy once in a while. So the guy I do the podcast with is Brad Rohrer. He's an improv guy. He's so funny. We started bringing on this comedian named Ray Harrington.
Yes.
And we realized like day one that we had a really funny dynamic with the three of us, because with me and Brad, it's very much like Goofus and Gallant.
Yeah.
Or, any sort of odd couple situation where you got a straight-laced dude. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. See?
From Highlights.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. That's why he has it, just for that
That's
reference.
right. It's not the fact that I have a 5.5-year-old I have to entertain to and from summer camp. Nonetheless.
But Brad and I have a great relationship. Very much straight man and silly guy. I'm the silly guy. He's a straight man. But Ray really pulled this different balance within this relationship with us, where it became Brad being so far towards this like buttoned up, mousy, no nonsense kind of guy, and me being like silly. Ray became like a middle centerpiece, and it really just worked so well, this dynamic with the three of us. So I'm gaining all this information, I'm having all this experience in the world of really, really high up podcasting, and I was also seeing that we were kind of forming this new dynamic. And at the same time, I was like, every week I was like, tune into episode 589 of the Chuck and Brad podcast. And I'm like, I don't know if people are really going to jump in when there's that much of a back catalog.
Sure.
And at the same time, Ray Harrington, who we became close to as friends in our personal life, he had his podcast, which was called Ray Harrington Must Content. And he was like, yeah, he's like, I love doing the podcast, but what I really miss is doing like a hang podcast and having, if you have a podcast where you interview someone all the time, as you know, you can't really do callbacks as much. You can't really do running jokes. And some people are tailored more towards that. Some people aren't. And he kind of really only wants that. I know Ray deep down, and I think he'd way more just want to play in this world of comedy where you can create a world and kind of, do callbacks and kind of have things build week to week as opposed to having a new person. So all these things were going on at once, and I kind of said to myself and to Brad and to Ray, I was like, man, would it be smart to just end the Chuck and Brad podcast, end Ray Harrington Must Content, and have us all come together and start over with the knowledge that I have, with the with the equipment I have, with the technical know-how and all that stuff, and kind of start over from episode 1. And the same thing was true for all of us. Brad had more experience recording and mixing and edit whatever we have to do. Ray had more experience than he did prior. So we kind of decided, let's just do that. So Funbearable started about 2 years ago.
You kind of buried the lead, though, on that when you brought this to them about the conversation. Because you had to wake the other guys up. They were in the bed with you.
Yeah,
like 2
exactly.
a.m.
Yes,
like
of course.
Hit you.
Well, it's like I could elbow them both at the same time.
Right,
which is
right,
great.
yeah, exactly. It happens,
There's a couple other things I do at the same time, but so
it's like a Muppet special. It's like, like, wait a second,
Man,
that's your feet.
I wish someone would put my hand on wires. It's tiring, but so we all decided, like, let's do it. So we ended the Chuck and Brad podcast, I think around episode 550, honestly.
Yeah.
And we started anew with Funbearable, and it was interesting because we're like, let's see how this goes when we're all together. We're all hosts. We're all equals on this thing, as opposed to Ray being a guest or us being a guest on Ray's podcast. And man, we've had so much fun. We recorded in the Comedy Connection in East Providence, Rhode Island, obviously.
Yep.
We recorded in the basement. We're really lucky. Corey and Dave let us record there. It's great.
Good people over there.
Great people.
That is like that is one of the premier locations for comedy, and it's not necessarily because of the venue. I mean, the building's nice, but the staff there, I mean, whether I see them in the building or outside of the building, they are always like top level. They deliver all the time.
They're really awesome. It's great because you'll see like national headliners there all the time. They're packed out week to week. It's unbelievably successful, but it's still an intimate room. And they care about a lot about the comedy, and also they care about the comedy scene, which they do not need to do. They
Right.
do not need to do the bringer shows. They do not need to like let me and Brad and Ray do our bizarre live Funbearable shows. They could just do like huge comics all the time and do really well, but they still encourage people to do things. I'm sure they lose money on some of the shows they do with like just locals. I'm sure they've lost money on shows we used to do there when we first started, but they still do it because they want to encourage people. It's a marathon,
not a sprint.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I think of it. And they still do it, and they still support it. So it's like every aspect in which they could be positive for the comedy community in Rhode Island, they've been positive. So just great people. But we record there. We've had a lot of fun. We've had a lot of guests. Mark Normand has been on, the comedian. Joe List has been on. Mike Cannon. A lot of comics. As well as, Brad and I will moderate cons at different conventions. And so we've had, we did a panel with the entire cast of the original Ninja Turtles cartoon.
Sure.
That was up on the show.
Yeah.
We did a panel with the entire cast of Futurama, the cast of Pinky and the Brain. We've done, for some reason, a lot of voice actors, but a lot of really, really fun stuff over the past couple of years. And man, we're approaching episode 100.
So we'll talk about the episode 100 in a second, but I really want to ask you this.
Yeah.
You've essentially created your dream life, or you've created this, which has been because let's face it, there are many careers out there you could do. You're very smart, you're a very capable person, but you've created this seemingly out of nothing. What does it mean to you, and what do you tell people who are kind of looking at this kind of a method of expressing themselves through art?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is something you've done it in such a way that, I mean, not everybody can start a podcast and get Mark Normand or these other guys. You've built this over time.
Yeah,
it's a huge credit to you.
I really appreciate that. That's very kind. That's very kind of you to say. For me, I was always so creativity forward, and I think a lot of people would think that was pretty dumb. A lot of people I've worked with thought it was pretty dumb because I was like, we're driving to Florida tomorrow to do this thing, and they're like, how much money are you making? I'm like, who cares about the money? And they're like, we do.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
And I think that for so long, because I started doing creative stuff like really seriously probably around 2002.
Yeah.
When I was 18, I started, we started the band Senior Discount, and with the band, we decided kind of right away that we're going to make comedy videos and performances part of what the band is, which is really strange. I think that if you just throw yourself at creativity and you really, really, really you try to do your best, you try to do things that are unique, you do things because you think they're great, not because it's what's popular. It's one of those things where a lot like stand-up, it's like if you just work super, super hard and you're okay with not getting any money or accolades for years, beyond a decade, then I think you'll move forward,
Sure.
And I think that's what happened with me. It's like I never really planned everything out. I just kind of followed whatever I wanted, what I thought would be great to make, So sometimes it was music, and then it was filmmaking, and eventually podcasting, and I think the next thing, the other two things were, I've been insanely tenacious over the years, like to the point where I'm sure I've annoyed, like, higher up people, like comedians, filmmakers, whatever, because I just constantly reach out and try to do projects and try to reach, say, with the band, it was always like, we want to do this show. Can we come to this show? And then with the podcast, it was like, do you want to come on my podcast? Then it was with people I wanted to work with. It's, hey, I want to come work with you, which is how all these things move forward, really.
Right.
It was me reaching out cold to Impractical Joker's manager, Dexter, is how I started working with Quinn's podcast,
Wow.
Impractical Jokers. Like, I just reached out to him cold. I said, you guys are doing a live show. You never do a live show. You need to film it. I have experience filming. Let me come film it.
Yeah.
And they, with 24 hours of notice, they said sure. And
Yeah.
so I had to get a crew together. I had to teach my buddy Brad and my ex-girlfriend how to shoot in that night beforehand.
Right.
And we went and did it. Mark Norman and Joe List with Tuesdays with Stories. I reached out to them cold and said, I think I can help you do your Patreon by bringing really elevated film projects to the table. I think people will really respond to that. And it's great that those people were open to that, and I'm lucky and I'm happy, but there were probably another 100 people I reached out to
That's it.
that said no,
Or no
didn't
way.
respond.
Yeah, right.
So I think that tenacity is a big thing. I think that just nonstop creativity and just kind of being like, I'm just going to do it. I don't care what happens. It was a big thing. And there was a third one I was going to say, but I really think it is kind of it's funny, you see this, there's an interview with Seth Rogen, there's a clip that's going around, and he goes, people ask me how to make it, and the only thing I can tell you is, the only thing I'm sure will make you not make it is quitting. That's the only thing in common with people who don't make it, is at some point they stop trying. And his example is Ian McKellen. He said, did you ever hear about Ian McKellen before he turned 65?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Well, even William Shatner. I mean,
Yeah.
he didn't. I think the story goes he was like in his 70s or 60s, and was like just, and then it finally it hit, and you're right. And
by the way, I'm no Magneto. I'm just using him as an example of people moving forward. I'm more of a Gambit.
Sure.
I think. Mon ami.
I mean,
Don't kiss me. If you're a rogue, you'll take my powers.
it works. Whatever works for you.
Yeah.
Let's just keep keep the wires on your hands there. You'll do just fine.
But yeah, I mean, I'm really happy that I get to make a living being creative. But I'm obviously on the low end of that. I'm a low-level, successful creative person. So I really appreciate that. It's very kind. And whenever anyone asks me, like, oh yeah, so what do you think about how you got to where you are? I think it was just nonstop perseverance and creativity. And for me, it was, I go to bed thinking about a cool thing I could make, and I wake up thinking about a cool thing I can make.
Right.
And the aspect of like, how am I going to get paid for that thing is not part of it. And so I think that maybe made me come off as a little bit more authentic.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
Because it's, honestly, even right now, I think about this all the time. My favorite art comes from people who are like making a thing that they personally think is cool, and not something built off of what is already popular that people think will be marketable.
A true passion project.
Yeah. Actually, so do you know The Lonely Island? It's it's Andy Samberg and his two friends from SNL that did all the digital shorts that everyone knows. They did Justin Timberlake, Natalie Portman. They made a thing a couple years ago, and to me, I was like, this is art. This is the definition of art for me. And what they did was they dropped it on Netflix. It's an album, audio only, and a music, like a video album. And they came up with a concept of what if Jose Canseco and Mark McGuire had a rap album in the 90s during the home run derby stuff.
They're steroids.
Yes. And the album is largely about that.
Nice.
But no one asked for that.
Right.
There's no reason to believe it's popular. There's not a crazy resurgence of these two guys right now. They were just like, this is a crazy thing we want to make.
Yeah.
And that's all I care about.
Yeah.
That's all I care about is this is a crazy thing that we want to make that we think would be cool. And that's kind of that's all I think about. And my phrase that I always say is, for me personally, what we have is what we will believe in. And so you take what you got and you say, and we're going, you know?
There you go. You're going to start touring with Anthony Robbins on that next one. Tony Robbins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Start yelling at people. Break this arrow with your neck. What we have.
Yeah.
It's first aid not included. So the 100th episode is coming up.
Yes.
Is it something where people should listen to episodes if they're new to this? Is it something they should listen to certain episodes leading up to, or is it you could jump in cold?
That's a great question. You put a lot of thought into this.
I know.
You're good at this. You're good at doing this kind of stuff.
And I can operate a motor vehicle at the same time.
Barely.
It's
There's been some jitters.
I've learned.
I saw the squirrel.
I've learned just two else. He has a name. All right. Say his name. It's Chippy.
No, I think we're all performers. We've all been performing for a long time in different capacities. And when we do a live show, we actually think about that in terms of we want people who love the podcast to have a great time if they come out. And we want people who have never heard the podcast to have a great time if we come out. So we try to do things that maybe are part of the podcast history, but will always give you the context and give you the intro. I think for the first 10 years of Marvel movies, that's what they were awesome at. They were awesome at rewarding the people who were fans and also being accessible to people who are seeing it for the first time. Yeah. And that's kind of our goal with our live shows for Funbearable. Yeah. Is if you walk through the door and you have no idea who we are, we don't want you to feel lost at all. So we'll purposely we'll come up with stuff, we'll come up with bits, and we'll really make sure that our personalities are clear for the bits we have to do, and we don't want anyone to feel lost at all. You can just walk in. You don't have to listen to Funbearable before you go to the show. You can walk in and have a great night. And I would like to say, our live podcasts, they're not podcasts. We don't just sit down at a table and talk. We always come up with bits and segments and video segments, sketch stuff, prank stuff.
It's a show.
It's a real full variety show.
It's a show.
Yeah, I don't know why we decided not to do podcasts when we do a live podcast. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I was like, let's do more. Let's do these big segments. We actually just did a comedy show. We did a live episode in the winter at the Comedy Connection called Funbearable's Winter Funderland. Yep. And we said we're going to cover every holiday, every winter holiday. We said Christmas, it gets so much coverage and people talk about it so much. We want to just do everything else that's around that time. And so the show was 3 different segments. The first one, Brad came out as Abe Lincoln, was like, welcome to our President's Day show.
I like that.
And the entire running joke of his for the show was that every segment he came out was a different president and tried to turn it into a President's Day show. Second segment, we had hooked up some night vision cameras in Brad's house because he had been taking Ambien and we thought he was doing some weird stuff, and we caught some weird stuff, and that became part of the show. And the final segment was for Valentine's Day, the Funbearable dating game, where we got a woman from the audience and she came up and we'd played the dating game, but we had all written each other's answers. Okay. And we had to read them. So we try to do fun, very different stuff. Sure. And part of our goal, I think, is we want people to walk out, no matter how well they know us, saying, I never would have thought that that's what I was saying today. Yeah.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, it's very fun. It's really, really fun.
So the show is, when is the show and where can people learn more to get tickets about it?
The show is Sunday, July 21st at the Comedy Connection in East Providence, Rhode Island. Yep. And it's tickets are going to be at funbearablepod.com. That's going to have your ticket link, Facebook event stuff right at the top of the page. And that's also going to have all of our newest episodes as well as all of our guest episodes. So if you're interested in hearing Mark Normand or Joe List or Mike Cannon or these TV casts I talked about, Walt Flanagan, different people, All those episodes are highlighted right there at funbearablepod.com.
Well, you got to go online. Use your whatever your podcasting app of choice is.
Yes.
Smash the subscribe. Smash the
Smash.
like. 5-star
And don't
review.
just press it because it doesn't work. You have to smash. It's
Literally.
broken. It's broken. You got to smash it. Yeah.
Use of a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
Whatever you can.
Yeah.
Whatever.
You got to
is
replace
available.
that like button.
Yeah. It is what it is. What are you gonna do? But
yeah.
sir, I'm
Dude.
always inspired by you, watching you on socials. Folks, make sure you follow him. Not only the podcast, but follow him on the socials because
Thank
there's
you,
always
buddy.
great stuff out there, as well as your co-hosts and your partners in this whole thing.
Yeah.
It's something really inspiring, and if you're depressed, it'll make you feel better about yourself in life. So,
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, I mean, it's
We're depressed sometimes. We talk about it.
well, you're in the Toyota Camry talking about your show, so I mean,
You told me I was doing it from the trunk.
well, the next guest is back there waiting to slide in. So.